Alright, so this is going to be fun. So I got the book, Wilhelm Reich, The Mass Psychology of Fascism. What I like about this book so far, I need to point out that my primary um, sources that I've come to my own conclusion about fascism influences are Joseph Campbell, who I can't recall, but if he does, it might be once or twice, but for the most part, not at all. It does not actually directly address fascism, as in to identify or or term. Um, Henry David Thoreau does not use the word fascism. Some people would say it's because fascism predates him, but that's some people. And the teachings of not only the Buddha, from Buddhism, as in the historic Buddha Siddhartha Gautama, or as well as Nichiren Daishonin, who's a Buddhist monk from the 12th century in Japan. Um, oh, I've drawn what I would like to think, but I haven't done in depth. Um, Significantly from Dr. Gabor Mate, who in one sense is along this lines, as well as Martin Luther King. I gotta actually say Martin Luther King. I have to probably attribute with the inspiring force to target fascism as a whole. I state my critique of Martin Luther King is that the height of his social awareness, I don't know if social is the right, social is one dynamic of it, his ability to put it all together essentially, at the height got to basically a junior high, middle school level. And I say that because during the civil rights movement, the notion that he was purporting was that Americans that are dark complexion, that being black, have equal opportunity within the American society as a whole. And it took him deep struggles within that psychology before he started to realize that why the hell would any authentic, compassionately driven leader want the people that look to him to be a part of something as heinous as what he started to see. And I've read it about 10 times, listened to it maybe 10 times. Um, the April 4th, 1967 speech, that's 1 year, his pre-anniversary assassination speech, in which he begins to use the analogy or the comparative analogy of Nazi Germany with, at that point, modern American society, which lost him, still to this day, a lot of fans. So, and on that level, that was a invigorating, I guess you could say. So now that I got a hold of this is, I consider, meat. um, I want to get into some parts. This guy, I'm reading this is just a preface. I'm probably going to do this through parts. So, Mass Psychology of Fascism, Commentary 1. The extensive and painstaking therapeutic work on the human character has led me to the conclusion that, as a rule, we are dealing with three different layers of the biopsychic structure in the evaluation of human reactions. So each human has a trinity, so to speak. And the Greeks had this. This is kind of, you're going to see this common association, word association, because that's all language is. The Greeks, the and the Taoists as well, predating the Christian concept of the Trinity. You had the Taoists in the East and the Greeks in the West, reliant on a mathematical equation to explain basically what we would equate to the Big Bang, and that's that something about three being a prime number, and some I don't really understand it, but the Taoists say from one came two, from two came three, and from three came all, and the four is all of those. So it's the three and one, three and one, and the one is all kind of scenario. So here we have three layers. On the surface layer of his personality, the average man is reserved, polite, compassionate, responsible, conscientious. There would be no social tragedy of the human animal if this surface layer of the potential personality were in direct contact with the deep natural core. This, unfortunately, is not the case. The surface layer of social cooperation is not in contact with the deep biological core of one's selfhood. It is born by a second, carried, not born from, but carried, and like a parasite. An intermediate character layer, which consists exclusively of cruel, sadistic, lascivious, rapacious, and envious impulses. It represents the Freudian unconscious, or what is repressed. To put it in the language of sex economy, it represents the sum total of a so-called secondary drives. If one penetrates through this destructive second layer, deeper into the biologic substratum of the human animal, one always discovers the third, deepest layer, which we call the biologic core. In this core, under favorable social conditions, breastfeeding is a favorable social condition. Natural birth is a favorable social condition. A child being held instead of a stroller is a favorable social condition. Man is an essentially honest, industrious, cooperative, loving, and if motivated, rationally hating animal. What I'd like to say is I stole this kind of from Buddhism, but I've used it in a poem, and I've extended it recently. And that's that I wrote a journalist. I wrote a poem about my journalist, my sibling journalist. And in it I says, I have a line, something along the lines of, you brought us from the trees. Well, I've since expanded that because I've realized that it's childish of me to allow myself to be fixated on the debate of evolution from the standpoint of whether we came from monkeys. So in my own childish retort to that, I now purport that no, it's not that we came from monkeys, it's monkeys came from us. But even on a further and a more coherent grasp of what that argument is about, it's not about whether we came from monkeys or not. It's that through the evolutionary process, we came from the sea. And we came from water, essentially. Still do. To allow oneself to be fixated on the debate on whether we came from monkeys or not, as if on that rests the entirety of our understanding of the development of life, is stupid. Is as stupid as the argument that is based its entire significance on the fact that we couldn't come from monkeys because of all these pathetically idiotic assertions. Okay, so what else we got here? So that's the three cores. I like that. And I go back to I'm going to skip, that's the beginning of the preface of the third edition. The other thing too, this is the third edition. I learned this with the outline of history from H.G. Wells. It's a 2-volume set. I was lucky enough in the process of helping a friend move to come across the ninth edition. While reading the introduction of the ninth edition, I got it's written by H.G. Wells. I came to understand that what I had in my hand was a very valuable resource because H.G. Wells explained that through the prior eight editions, he was heavily reliant on not just the research that he did, but primarily on conveying the research of others. But in the ninth edition, which was, I believe, 1945, this is 1949, actually, this is 1942. But in the ninth edition that he did in H.G. Wells' outline of history, he reported that after doing eight different editions and very thorough interviews and whatnot and compiling of data over the course of time, the ninth edition was what, in his own personal view, a culmination of all of those years of work. And in the same way, this is the third edition, and he does get into a brief summary that when it was first written. The mass psychology of fascism was thought out during the German crisis, 1930 to 1933. It was written in 1933. The first edition appeared in September of 1933 and the second edition in April of 1934 in Denmark. 10 years have elapsed since then. So, but one of the things too that I really like about this is I have been asserting, reading from Plato's Republic, I have identified Plato's Republic as a source code, so to speak, of modern day fascism that is not accepted in any academic or scholarly sphere. Luckily, there's another nut job here, and I would like to point out too that this man's books were burned by the Nazis and the communists in the 1930s in Europe and other, for mostly Germany, but in Russia as well. Soviet Russia and fascist, Soviet communist Russia and fascist Germany. They were burned. His 1943 third edition in the 1950s was burned, not just banned, but burned, book burnings in America. So, so he talks about fascism. Here we go. Okay. Moreover, the political ideology of European Marxist parties was based on economic conditions that were confined to a period of some 200 years, from about the 17th to the 19th century. The 17th century is when they say historically was the birth of capitalism. I think it's like 1757 or something along that line. At the same time, as well as coupled, paralleled with the Industrial Revolution. From about the 17th to the 19th century, during which the machine was developed. 20th century fascism, on the other hand, raised the basic question of man's character, human mysticism, and craving for authority. Craving for authority. That is a substitution for a nurturing mother, which covered a period of some 4,000 to 6,000 years. So that's what I like too, is because with the luxury of the sources that I've had, is I've taken the ability, my own ability to think, and I've applied it in such a broad means that I pinpointed, by the fact that I pinpointed in my own mind Plato to be a fascist ideological demigod or preacher, if you want to call it that, or forefather, or founding father, and that Socrates, I've gone even further to the point where I look at Socrates as somewhat of a artificial intelligence, computer program, early type model that's not a real character, that is actually Plato's own diabolically sick fascist brain purporting this stuff in the exact way that fascism works, and that is in this secondary figure outside of you that you recount as if you're portraying yourself as loyal and all this kind of mumbo jumbo. But but I was alone, and I had no source to draw on to say, oh, fascism extends beyond Mussolini. Every modern day respectable critic and educator and scholar identify fascism as, even though they don't identify it as Rome, at the very least, I was trying to make that argument in order to justify the extension. But they, at the very least, they give it to Mussolini because he came up with a modern definition of the term, even though the term existed far beyond. And the other thing too is that the existence of the term does not have any relevance on the existence of the concept. Just because there's the lack of a term doesn't mean the concept doesn't exist. So it was very nice to see that there was a well-respected person of a higher thought, so to speak, that likewise saw like the human structure. Okay, indeed, sex economy goes so far as to say that the abominable excesses of the capitalist era of the past 3,000 years, predatory imperialism, defraudation of the working man, racial subjugation, etc., were possible only because the human structure of the untold masses who had endured all this had become totally dependent upon authority, incapable of freedom, and extremely accessible to mysticism. So, this craving for authority in a dualistic system, if you look at, I talk about the flower of life and some things, and there's a, it's not readily, it kind of is, in a dualistic system is the nurturing mother. So when you lose your nurturing mother, so here we go. This is actually the symbol of Lucifer. And because the whole concept of Lucifer is the duality of good and evil, so to speak. So when you can sever the bond, like Plato talks about, he uses Socrates to talk about in Book 4 of the Republic. The way to sever the bond between the parent, between the child and the mother in particular, is to create an ideological base, a religion, and legion, not to be lost with republic, but republic, is to create a mindset, a psychology that is motivated primarily from an idea that beyond life there is a penal system that, when compared to the drudgery, this is the important thing, because Plato was what we would consider today a political elitist, or a ruling class, if you want to use that terminology. And as such, when you get into like that mindset, like it's easier for a rich man, it's easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to enter into the kingdom of God, kind of thing. When you're born in that, and you live in that, and you exist completely in that, this concept of the duality of, oh, if you don't do right, the afterlife has way worse ramifications, is menial. However, when your entire existence, or take the example of was Chicago now, a kid that was born in Chicago the last 4 years, a 4-year-old that was born in Chicago, has been raised in a community, obviously black, has been raised in a community that has experienced not only a type of isolation, but over 200 schools have been, public schools have been closed in Chicago. The last few years, over 500 people have been uh, killed in primarily almost all shooting deaths each year, which far exceeds most of the killing numbers of the ruthless 80s when gang violence was on the rise. Like in LA, in the movie Colors, for example, something like 386 people were killed in, I think, in 1986 or 84 in Los Angeles. To give you a perspective of what it means that 500 people were shot to death last year, over 500 people were shot to death last year in Chicago. Um, so a child born in that scenario, hospitals closed, um, who doesn't have the mental faculty to understand exactly what's going wrong around them, is compounded on the fact that the whoever the parental figure is, or the mother, or let's just deal with the mother, not to knock the mom, but to show the significance of the mom as the target. But the mother in that situation is in a state of basically shell shock. And it's not a degrading statement against the mother, it's that the mother is merely a frickin' human frickin' being. And under these conditions of such monumental stress, the only type of brain that cannot be adversely affected developmentally, yes, that means growing mature and grasping and shit like that, is, there's two types, and that's that Luciferian thing. It's a brain that is so degraded and degenerated that coping is not even a mechanism, it's just shut down. It's pure fascial, mechanical, just survival, boom, boom, boom. Compared with a elevated, on contrasted, not compared with, contrasted with an elevated view of life that recognizes, or not necessarily focuses, well, you could say focuses in a war type targeting, focuses or recognizes the source of the calamity as opposed to the agents. The agents being primarily the members of family, community, immediate family and immediate community. That being the case that what they call like black on black violence. It's when you identify it as black on black violence. That's the mechanistic fascist interpretation of reality, as in that's the way they are. When you understand the source of this, that's an elevated, it's like you can look at the planet, you can look down at the planet Earth while you're standing on the sidewalk and see the concrete. Or you could look down on the planet Earth from the space station, International Space Station, and see the globe, the Earth, not as a whole because it's round, but see it in a grander perspective. So, from an elevated view, it's not a moralistic judgment, it's just one's ability to perceive things. At that perception, your imagination is broader, so to speak, but at the same time, you're distant. So there's a human capacity to do both for a reason. and it's not to find the middle, but it's like the Buddhism, the middle ground. The middle ground is an analogy for all encompassing as opposed to you're fair and balanced. That's a very stupid, childish concept. I'm fair and balanced. Um, another book that I got today too, to give you an example, is this book about the CIA diary from this guy who was a CIA agent who was stationed in Mexico for a while. And so an example is right now, Mexican Americans, they are striving, like black people in the 60s, in the 50s, and maybe even today, they are striving to prove, even the crazy thing is even the gang member ones, uh, they're striving to prove in one real sense that they are authentic Americans. The gang members being, this is not just my country, but this is my street. They're taking it to new heights to cope with it. But that is missing the broader perspective that that identity crisis that exists, like this guy talks about it, the United States military operations in the 1920s and 30s in Mexico, that resulted in over 2 million Mexicans' deaths, and that was the beginning of the degradation of the agriculture legacy that Mexico, Central America had. Um, Again, noting that 10,000 years ago, 15,000 years ago, something like that, that region of the world invented corn, which there used to be over something like 15,000 different strains of corn. And since the introduction of fascio, European, Romanesque, Greek, Western ideological influence, the same effect that it's had on everything, it's a communistic monopolization of a state enterprise. There are now less than something along the lines of 14 strains of corn on the planet now. And realistically speaking, in the next 20 years, the companies like Monsanto, I'm running out of time here, will reduce it down to maybe one or two, and they'll be genetically modified. So, I'm going to keep going on this. I just like to say that I feel, in one sense, vindicated. I got an ego too. I like to stroke it. And as such, I'm going to move forward, and every day I'm going to maybe just do a chapter at a time. I'll figure out how it's broken up. But until then, peace out. 28 minutes.